Good morning and welcome back to the Nürburgring. It's time for the morning warm-up, and I hope you're all ready for some action on circuit, although I have to say at the moment the weather conditions here, if you've been following us all weekend, you've known that it's pretty cold and sometimes wet. Well, it's all combined this morning. We've also got fog as well. Not a real surprise to anyone who's been to the Nürburgring in the past, John. It's a fairly common weather conditions here.
Indeed it is, and I have to say, not that I was here in 1968, but from my days as an avid reader of autosport and motoring news, the German Grand Prix that year, of course, Jackie Stewart in the Matra Ford won it, and there was fog for the entire Grand Prix, and what we're seeing now is the fog beginning to descend. There we see on screen just how bad it is, and the hope is that once everybody goes out for this final 30-minute warm-up, that conditions will not deteriorate, and we will not see this fog just settling on the Eiffel Mountains and on the new Nürburgring and become a factor in this afternoon's Grand Prix.
Well, a lot of people, of course, turning up here this morning. Long queues of cars being parked by the roadside as we came in at around about 7:30 this morning. They reckon it's going to be between 90 and 100,000 people here today, and I should think that even with the bad weather conditions, they'll all be here to support their hero, Michael Schumacher. But there is the driver who's taken pole position for the weekend, and it looks as though there's a nice, relaxed atmosphere within that Williams pit this morning.
Yes, and part of that smile on his face may be that he now finally can own up to being a member of the Marlboro McLaren Mercedes-Benz team for 1996, because the release was in the press room this morning when we came in, and a secret, of course, everybody was aware of, but nonetheless, to give the team and their partners the maximum degree of support, and therefore, when the announcement was made, David Coulthard could now say, yes, my plans for 96 will be known. What it doesn't say in this press release, though somewhat ironically, is the period of time that David Coulthard is with the team. Ordinarily you would say 1, 2 or 3 years, but in this release there is no mention of the duration of the contract.
So we'll have to try and find that out. Of course, it means that he'll be joining Mika Häkkinen in the McLaren Mercedes team, and they've also confirmed that Jan Magnussen will remain as their test driver for next season. Jan has done a little bit of running this year, but remember, he's been concentrating on the German Touring Car Championship with Mercedes, but perhaps next year he will get more involved in the testing program.
Well, I think if you're in a program such as the DTM in Germany, that is a distraction to your Formula One testing, and equally doing the racing. The two things are very difficult to amalgamate. So I think every time that Jan Magnussen gets into a Formula One car, it's taking him a certain length of time to adapt to the kind of car a Grand Prix car is, and then he goes back into his German touring car, his Mercedes C-Class, and again you sort of have to reassess and readjust to that particular car's requirements. And the two cars, I mean, while they're magnificent machines, but are poles apart in terms of what is required of them in their various forms.
Interesting to see that also in the press release, Ron Dennis has confirmed that Alain Prost will likely have a possible future role in the team. It's not, in fact, determined what it will be yet.
I think that very much is the case with the company these days. Even when engineers, designers join the team, they're not given a specific role within the team. They've said, come into the team, we'll see where we can fit you in, where we think the best place for you is. And clearly for Alain Prost, the areas that he can assist the team are on the development of the car, both the chassis and the engine. And it's so important even today to make sure that the engine performance is flattering or complementary to that of the chassis. There is the red flag being shown now. I think, wonder, is that due to the fact that the bottom of the circuit is actually engulfed now in fog?
Well, it looks as though we are having a delay. It was due to see the green flag then. 9:30 is just passed, and Roland Brunserad obviously feeling that it's not safe to send the cars out in these conditions, and when you're travelling at something like 180 miles an hour on that back straight, this sort of foggy conditions really making life very dangerous indeed.
And on top of that, the track is again saturated from the rain. It's not been heavy rain, it's that fine mist that you get with fog, but the track itself is saturated, so the combination of spray and the fog really, Roland Brunserad has decided that he feels he should delay the start of this final warm-up until the conditions do improve. Well, there is certainly wind around the circuit, and that's a positive sign. So hopefully that fog that's at the bottom, right down at the Dunlop curve, will ultimately get blown away. But whether that is in the next few minutes or whether we're going to see this fog come right through and then in half an hour or maybe even longer disappear.
I have to say, John, it's actually been getting worse over the last 10-15 minutes. When I came up into the booth about 15 minutes ago, I could see across to the backside of the circuit. It's getting worse and worse, and I do rather worry that having stopped it now, that we're not going to get this underway for quite a while.
Well, it seems to me the alternate solution is to put out those 3 magnificent former Formula 1 Mercedes-Benz cars that were being run yesterday to entertain the crowd. Of course, that would mean I'd have to leave the commentary booth to join Jochen Mass and Dario Franchitti, but I must say the conditions are pretty bad, whether you're in a 1935 Formula 1 Mercedes-Benz or a 1995 McLaren Mercedes-Benz.
Indeed, not good conditions. There you can see the support here for the second German driver, Heinz-Harald Frentzen, and obviously a lot of support for him. And I have to say that Frentzen could be a good bet for at least a podium finish here today. His performances in the wet yesterday morning, 3rd fastest, and on the roll after some great performances in the last 2 Grand Prix as well. It could be a great day here for Frentzen.
Yes, indeed, but of course everybody will have to get through that first corner, and that's going to be a problem.
Well, Michael Schumacher out of his car, walking back to the garage, and a little fed up, I think. Just was all ready to get out there and get some important running in the Benetton Renault, but he's not going to have the chance as the red flag delays the start of the session.
For Sport Live.
So welcome back to this morning warm-up that's not happening at the moment. We've seen a red flag at the start of the session. The cars were all lined up ready to go, and we have the official reason on our computer screen. It says delayed for fog, and the fog has been coming down over the last 10-15 minutes. Michael Schumacher's looking pretty happy and relaxed. He came in this morning into the paddock and of course was inundated by marshals wanting autographs, and he stood there patiently, signed all their autographs, and then got out of the cold and the rain and disappeared into the warmth of the Benetton motorhome morning. Now we've got a guest with us this morning for this morning warm-up that's not happening, and it's Alan Henry, Grand Prix editor of Autocar magazine, one of the most experienced Grand Prix journalists on the scene, been covering Grand Prix for over 20 years and has written over 25 books on the subject. Good morning and welcome, Alan, to Eurosport.
Thank you very much indeed.
Well, of course, you've seen many situations over the years in Grand Prix racing. What about this situation at the Nürburgring? Can you remember this sort of scene before?
Off the top of my head, I can't. I mean, there have been several days, I think, that practice sessions have been, qualifying sessions have been rained off or fogged off, but I can't ever recall a race morning in circumstances like this.
I have to say, it doesn't really surprise me at this time of year. I mean, if you're going to run a race at the Nürburgring, you would rather wonder if it might not be better to run it a little earlier in the year.
Well, absolutely. This was the scenario that everybody was worried about from the very moment they announced that this fixture would take place in the autumn.
It's Eddie Irvine just having some fun with the camera, getting his sponsors well into the picture. And of course, Alan, a lot of news about Eddie Irvine this week, the transfer to Ferrari that's caught us all a little bit on the hop. Oh, John's just claiming it didn't catch him on the hop, that's all.
No, well, yes, that's right. I mean, it's difficult to know quite where that's going to lead Eddie Irvine, whether he's just going to be the latest helping of cannon fodder for Michael Schumacher in the second car, or he's going to actually be able to establish his own position and role in the team. I think he's going to be up against it next year in a big way, because I think Schumacher's the sort of guy who doesn't take any hostages, teammates or not.
But Eddie, if anybody can, then Eddie probably has the sort of character that could do it.
Well, I've heard that theory bandied about this weekend. I'm a bit sceptical about that. I tend to think that Michael Schumacher will do his own thing, and we'll probably have him for breakfast, quite frankly.
Well, we shall wait and see. It's certainly a fascinating prospect. There is Rubens Barrichello within the Jordan Peugeot pit. Of course, he'll be staying with the team next year, and you can see that he's pretty well topped up. Of course, all these guys are pretty used to this sort of weather when they're testing in the middle of winter at Silverstone, but they don't really expect it mid-season at the Grand Prix, do they?
Absolutely.
Well, Rubens Barrichello next year, of course, will be joined by Martin Brundle. What do you see about that sort of partnership between those two?
Well, I think Martin's one of the real pros of this business, totally dependable, enormously experienced, a real solid, rock-solid base man to have. I think it's going to be good for Jordan. I think Jordan have had a troubled couple of years. It's slipped back ever so slightly, and I think having a guy like Martin aboard will steady the rudder slightly and hopefully get them moving forward again.
And a good relationship between Eddie Jordan and Martin, of course, from their Formula 3 days together.
Absolutely, yes, of course. We tend to forget that Martin was one of the few guys in Formula 3 who could really get on terms with Senna back in 1983.
That's right, so it'll be interesting to see how that all progresses. There's Gerhard Berger just discussing things, and I should think, in fact, if the weather remains like this but clears up a bit, that Ferrari could be in quite good shape. We've seen some good performances from Ferrari all this year when we've had wet sessions.
Yes, absolutely. I think Gerhard's going to be very strong this afternoon indeed.
We're just taking a little look back at some of the action we've seen already this weekend, and some of the moments that in the wet weather has caught out to the drivers. Most of these pictures were in fact from yesterday morning's pre-practice session. There you can see the McLaren of Mika Hakkinen, that mid-wing, and Jean Alesi, the only one to try slick tyres during that session yesterday. Maybe a little too brave and ending up running out of road. Somebody else had a go on slicks?
The two McLarens had a go at the end of the session in slicks, but they thought obviously it was a premature move. The conditions weren't right for it.
Well, indeed, it did seem still pretty slippery at the end of the session yesterday, and the conditions of the circuit at the moment are worse than it ended up yesterday. There's Heinz-Harald Frentzen. We were speaking about him earlier. Good performance again yesterday, and probably, as somebody was saying earlier this morning, one of the surprises of this year perhaps is that Heinz-Harald Frentzen is remaining at Sauber for next year and isn't stepping into one of the established top teams.
Absolutely. I think it could be described as a missed opportunity for one or two of the top teams. I think Frentzen is a real long-term star in this business, but I think John referred a couple of races ago to his contractual situation, but in fact his future may be best served by having one more year with the Sauber team and then being free of any contractual constraints to move into a long-term relationship with one of the top operators.
Indeed, and that of course we'll wait to see what happens next year. We've got a lot of new things happening next year. Gerhard Berger, Jean Alesi going to Benetton, Jacques Villeneuve coming in. Alan, what's your opinion? I mean, you know, you've been watching Grand Prix racing for many, many years. You've seen IndyCar drivers come over to Grand Prix racing. The most recent, of course, is Michael Andretti, but before that is Father Mario. What is your opinion of Jacques Villeneuve, having perhaps seen some of the footage this year, and how do you think he's going to fit in with the Williams team and working with Damon Hill?
I think Villeneuve will get the job done quite adequately next year, and I think long term he's obviously got what it takes. I think we tend to play down the potential form of IndyCar drivers. I think we perhaps look too much at Michael Andretti's experience, which was, of course, at a time there were restrictions on the number of laps and we had all the technology and there was problems with him getting enough testing done. I don't think that was necessarily a representative barometer by which to judge IndyCar drivers in general. I must say, I went to the first test that Villeneuve had at Silverstone and went out on the circuit, which is a fairly rare occurrence for an old hack like myself, but I was impressed. I thought he drove it beautifully smoothly, and he was looked a lot tidier than Coulthard and Irvine on the same day.
Well, there we are, just looking through the fog. You can see there's still the reason for the delay in this warm-up and the reason we don't see any cars on track at the moment.
Well, Alan, it's pretty inactive here. Pits empty and garages, drivers walking around, cups of tea, and just wondering how long it's going to be before they get back out. But just looking back at that test that Jacques Villeneuve did, I happened to be at Silverstone the same day, and probably was quite skeptical about another IndyCar driver trying to make it into Formula One, and in particular thinking about, you know, Gilles Villeneuve, his son, and the kind of situation that always evolves around that. So I have to say I was very impressed indeed with what we saw from Jacques Villeneuve. And that was the first day, and I know on the second and third days the performance just got better and better, and I think that the Williams team were very pleasantly surprised by that performance.
Absolutely. I think the other point to sort of remember is that the guy did a lot of European Formula 3, Japanese Formula 3, so perhaps the best way to look at Jacques Villeneuve is that he's not really an IndyCar driver, he's a European F3 driver who did IndyCars instead of Formula 3000. But I think he's going to do a good job
Well, we look forward to seeing Jacques Villeneuve in his first Grand Prix in Melbourne next year. And still, there's the scene over the Nürburgring, and little prospect of this morning session starting. Well, Alan, what do you think is going to be the case? If they don't get out for this 30-minute warm-up shortly, will they schedule it for later on, or are they just going to have a straw poll amongst the teams and say, look, you've had wet weather running, you've had a chance to do a race setup, let's focus on what we're going to do for the Grand Prix itself?
I suspect what they'll do is they'll give them 15 minutes before they go on the grid.
Yes, indeed, we've seen that happen, in fact, in the past as well, and that would be certainly not a satisfactory solution, but one that may well be the case. So we're going to go for a short break and join us back here at the Nürburgring in a couple of moments.
Once again, the session, which had been delayed due to fog, is about to restart. We've got about just under 4 minutes due until the restart. The fog has lifted. We can see a little bit more across the circuit now. Some trees which had disappeared completely from our view have now magically reappeared, but the rain has come down even more heavily than before. We've had a very heavy rain shower. Perhaps that's partly the reason that the fog has cleared a little, but as you can see, the cars lining up at the end of the pit lane, and once again Michael Schumacher anxious to be the first on the circuit, perhaps to get a little bit of clear running. Damon Hill sitting in the pit garage with the tyre blankets on, trying to get a little bit of heat into those tyres. And of course Damon Hill will be starting second on the grid for this afternoon's Grand Prix, with teammate David Coulthard starting from the pole. And the big question really this weekend, as we go into this race, is will there be any team orders? We've got Alan Henry with us, Grand Prix editor of Autocar magazine. Alan, what's your opinion about this battle between Coulthard and Hill within the Williams camp?
I think it's fairly clear that David will only take direct instructions from Frank Williams in person on this, so this is down to Frank. I can see both drivers' point of view. It's a really ticklish problem. David's obviously wants to make up for lost time and add some more wins to his Portuguese success, but Damon knows that this is the final fork in the road. He's either going to do it this afternoon or it's all over, by the shouting.
So it's a tight time, and over the years you've seen Frank Williams operating with many good double driver lineups. Piquet and Mansell, of course, he had in the same team together, and all these sort of situations. How do you think that he will run it this afternoon?
Well, Frank traditionally is a racer. He likes nothing more to see his two top drivers at the front of the field going at it hammer and tongs between each other. And go back to 1986, and you could say that because of the way the team was managed, Mansell and Piquet raced themselves out of the World Drivers' Championship and allowed Alan Prost to pop through and pick it up at the end. So I suppose it's really your own personal taste. It's his team, but I don't think it's a strategy which necessarily makes for the most relaxed atmosphere for the drivers.
Well, an interesting situation for them, and we'll have to see what happens this afternoon. Of course, pole position is on the outside of the track here, so at least if it's dry, which looks very unlikely I have to say at the moment, it looks like we're in for a wet Grand Prix this afternoon, then that is the more grippy side, because that's the side they tend to run on more usually. But if the weather conditions stay like this, I think that the race itself could very well become a battle of the guys in the pit lane, the guys actually doing tyre changing. If it's changing a lot throughout the course of the race, we could see another Spa like we had earlier this year, or going back a couple of years, another Donington.
Absolutely, this could be the World Championship could be decided on a sticking tyre jam.
Indeed, and of course that puts quite a lot of pressure on those mechanics in the pit lane. They're all busy practicing this morning. A bright and early start for them. And in fact, the Williams guys had very little sleep last night. They got back to their hotel, I think, around about 3 o'clock in the morning. They were up again at 5:30. It just gives you some idea of the amount of commitment, the hard work that goes in to building these Grand Prix cars up ready for race day, and the Williams crew certainly working hard. And interestingly, they have decided to run with that new gearbox and the revised back end to the car today.
Absolutely, yeah. They now think they've got the reliability, and it's worth the shot at this stage in the season, which I think it is. Because Adrian Newey explained to me last week, it's a bit of a misnomer to describe the car as a B-spec. This is actually how FW17 was originally envisaged. So in fact what you're seeing is merely the definitive car today, racing for the first time.
Well, at last we get the green flag, and this morning warm-up session gets underway, and it gives us an opportunity to see just how wet it is. And look, you can see in the pit lane there, even at the slow speeds as they exit, they're throwing up quite a lot of water, and as soon as they're on track, look at the amount of spray that's being kicked up. At least here at the Nürburgring, unlike the other German venue, at least we don't have the trees around that really hold all that moisture in the air and make life so difficult. It's a little clearer here.
Yes, I'm not altogether sure that the conditions have ever been quite as bad as this at Hockenheim at any time, but certainly you don't have that problem of the avenue of trees through the forest.
Just look at that, though, coming down to the Dunlop hairpin, bottom part of the circuit, and that really, as you get behind another car, visibility very, very poor indeed. One of the problems, of course, in this cold weather as well, and in fact it's something that, John, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about. Well, one of the main problems in this cold weather is the point of visibility and misting up visors, even worse when it's so cold, of course.
Well, these are the worst conditions a driver can ever have to face, and with the low ambient temperature, a lot of moisture, and it's not just simply the rain, it's the air is very heavy with moisture, so your breath, the difference of temperature of your breath, the exhalation of breath, and the outside temperature on the visor, condensation automatically forms. The helmet manufacturers have looked at different ways of doing this, either by bleeding air into the helmet and trying to keep the air circulation. That's one way. There have been in the past various liquids that get wiped on to the face of a visor, or you can take the old-fashioned scuba diver's way, and that is you spit literally into your mask and then wash it away, and that gives you a film on the visor, but that's somewhat maybe old tech as opposed to high tech, and Formula One is about high tech, so I think it'll be down to a combination of good ventilation in the helmets. Some drivers also in fact wear a nose shield. That was something that we saw way back in the late 70s. Mario Andretti and Ronnie Peterson in Lotus in wet races, they devised a method, and then some of the helmet manufacturers made a shield to cover the nose. And in fact, if you look at motorcycle racing, lots of motorcyclists now use that shield for the very same reason. So I think high tech will be the answer to the problems of the afternoon.
Yes, indeed. It looked like David Coulthard was wearing one of those this morning when he put his helmet on, and all an attempt to stop that visor misting up. So a few cars out on the circuit, but still very early stages in this morning warm-up.
Live.
Welcome back to this morning warm-up, or this morning freezing cold, more like. Very wet conditions. Damon Hill's out on circuit, and Michael Schumacher is just a little behind him. Fastest so far, believe it or not, is Massimiliano Papis. He's just gone faster than David Coulthard. Good for him in the footwork heart, but they're all really just finding their feet at the moment, trying to see where the worst of the water lies. And we've only seen 6 cars actually set a lap time so far.
And when you talk about temperature, currently air temperature is 7 degrees Celsius, and we've got an identical track temperature, so conditions are about as bad as we would expect them to be at this time of year, the 1st of October in Germany. And Michael Schumacher now out for a second time. He went out, he's into the T car to give that car the final run, and he will make his decision, but the prime race car will obviously be his choice, whereas Heinz-Harald Frentzen seems to be undecided as to whether to come into the pit lane or to go back out, and that obviously is the result of a little error on Heinz-Harald's side, but into the pit lane he goes.
So onto that limited area. In fact, it looks like he's stopping at the top end. I think he's still trying to get the gravel or bits and pieces out of the car. Looked like he was slowing down a bit there. He's obviously had a bit of an off up at the chicane. Let's see what happened if we can.
Well, there it is on the left of the screen, and Heinz-Harald once again proves that gravel traps are failing to achieve the objective that they were designed to do, and drive straight through it back onto the track. And of course, with a very, very low bottom to these cars and the radiator air boxes, they just scoop up kilos of gravel, and of course driving at that speed, you're sort of, it's a bit like a speedboat ploughing through a sea, the way he makes his way through that gravel bed.
Well, I don't think he's going to be the last to fall off in these conditions. There's Michael Schumacher, and we just got a quick glimpse of Eddie Irvine behind him, and they are running that extra wing on the Jordan. This appeared out of nowhere in yesterday's free practice session, Gary Anderson caught me out completely. I'd been talking to him in the morning about the extra wing that McLaren run, and but of course I didn't actually ask him whether Jordan would be running an extra wing, so he didn't tell me. And then out came the car with it's very similar positioning, but it's attached differently. It's attached in fact to the main part of the rear wing, and he said that with that setup there's about 17 or 18 different individual elements to the rear wing on that car now.
A combination of all those elements, of course, leads to more downforce overall, not just at the rear of the car, but the balance in terms of straight line speed. They do find that it is quite a draggy solution to the problem, but in conditions like this, and if these conditions remain for a 2 o'clock start, then it may well be that teams decide that the advantage of having more overall downforce offsets any loss of speed. And since I have to say conditions, I assume, are not going to improve by any significant amount, well, I think everybody's going to look for the maximum downforce they can get onto their cars. And of course, different teams have got different solutions to that problem.
So Schumacher, no extra wings on at the Benetton. They've got that car running with virtually maximum amount of downforce that they can anyway. And they did struggle a little bit yesterday to get the car performing as well as they may have hoped in the wet-free practice. So this obviously a very important time for them to try and improve the balance and improve the grip of the car. And Schumacher always very, very fast in these sort of conditions. But so are Hill and Coulthard, and the car, the Williams car, has looked very good in these sort of conditions so far this year.
Yes, but I think it is in conditions like this you're going to see a variety or a number of virtuoso performances this afternoon, and Michael Schumacher certainly is known for that. With Damon Hill and David Coulthard has the advantage by being on pole, as does Damon Hill by being alongside him. But it's whoever leads will have the initial advantage until we come to a point when cars will have to stop. It may not be for tyres, but it most definitely will be for fuel, because one thing is clear, that nobody can go the full distance. All the cars that were designed around the 95 regulations have got a much smaller fuel capacity. So even if the tyre were, for example, able to run for the entire duration of the Grand Prix, some 68 laps, the cars will have to come in and refuel somewhere around about lap 34 to maybe lap 40. So that is something that everyone will have to do.
A little bit of slow motion from Michael Schumacher, who is fastest in this session so far, and fastest by a full 4.9 seconds in fact. He's on a 1 minute 41.6, and second fastest is Massimiliano Papis, ahead of Olivier Panis, just to confuse us, then Martin Brundle and Andrea Montermini.
The two cars that I really look forward to seeing in this session, and we've got some 19.5 minutes remaining, are Jean Alesi and Gerhard Berger. We've seen throughout the season that the Ferrari really works well in adverse conditions. Probably in proportion to its dry weather conditions, it's better in the rain. So Berger and Alesi have just done basically in and out laps, and as going back to that a virtuoso performance, we know what Schumacher is capable of. And he can afford, he's got the points advantage, he's got 17 points advantage over Damon Hill in the championship. So he has got a different approach to this race. He can be more relaxed, he can sit back if he chooses, or he can take a chance and go for the lead. Whereas for Damon Hill, his choice is much narrower. He must score the maximum number of points possible, and therefore the number of risks that he might be able to take or might be prepared to take, in my view, will be reduced because of that pressure of trying to score maximum. So with people like Berger and Alesi and Eddie Irvine also, he's on the third row, he's in the top 6 in qualifying. A lot of pressure around Damon Hill, and with conditions where you see almost impossible to see a car until it's almost on top of the camera position, it's going to be one of the most demanding and difficult and long Grand Prix of the season.
Gerhard Berger, that is, emerging from the gloom in the Ferrari. This will give us an opportunity to see how well he's going. In fact, he's already gone second fastest on one of his early flying laps. Damon Hill has just gone fastest, though. Hill has done a 1 minute 40.1. So we've got Hill, Schumacher, Berger and Alesi, who's also just put in a quick lap. They've all just suddenly improved. And Jean-Christophe Pouillon, who was up to second a moment ago, has now dropped down to fifth. But it's all changing very quickly.
Well, in effect, what we'll have now is times will change by the lap. As drivers get more track time, you can just see how tricky it is coming up through that very quick left and right up through into the Dunlop curve. And it is little rivers run across. It's quite steep there, so water being drained flows across, and it's just at the point of entry. You can see Berger's car stepped sideways out to the right, and a little mental note will be made by Berger that part of the track will be tricky, and the next time through I would think you'll see a slightly different entry into the corner to minimize the car's attitude at the point of hitting that standing water.
Watching Damon Hill now, second fastest. Schumacher's just gone fastest once again. A close gap between there. Look at that. Damon Hill really sliding the back end over the curb.
Yes, he let the back end get away, and then of course those curbs, the painted curb, very much slipperier than the track surface. So it's an area where drivers again have got to pay great attention. And so many corners here, the Nürburgring there, you see how much curbing there is. And the driver's always tempted to ride a curb. Damon Hill just about gets away with that one, because again, standing water on the left on the approach into the Coca-Cola curve, and that almost trapped him into the gravel trap.
Across the line he goes then, and he's gone fastest. So that dramatic looking lap from Damon Hill takes him faster than Michael Schumacher by virtually a second. Yeah, Hill is really trying to see where the grip lies. He's overstepping the limits on purpose just to try and get an idea of how much grip there is, and that's really the only way to be fast in the wet. You have to slightly overstep the limit to really find out where you are.
I think in some cases that would be nice, that you could tacky in a way, just entertaining us with a little rotation. But in fact, I think what you're doing is you're looking to increase your speed per lap. You're not deliberately provoking the track to find out just how much grip it has, because you don't know how much to provoke. You could be too far, and that could be the end of your session. But literally, drivers by the lap, as they get more feel from the car, they get more confidence for track conditions, will naturally push a little bit harder. There again, Luca Badoer and Eddie Irvine both going to take a grassy trip. Luca Badoer way off indeed, and Eddie Irvine just about managed to keep on track. And again, that part of the circuit just indicating how easy it is to overdrive. That's coming fairly quick up the hill. Damon Hill again looking to slide under Olivier Panis, but so difficult into that revised Vidal chicane. And now into the pits, Damon Hill, hand up. So Damon Hill still remains quickest. Michael Schumacher second, back in the pits. Gerhard Berger third, also in the pits. And we have to look to Jean Alesi to see whether he can go from fourth to being quickest.
So we've got Pedro Diniz, another victim of the slippery conditions, and it looks as though he's stuck. I don't think he's going to be able to get out of that situation. But Damon Hill fastest so far, having just come back into the pits. Michael Schumacher second. Now that looks like Max Papis going off the road at the same corner that we saw both Irvine and Badoer going off. It's obviously very slippery up at that part, but Papis has been putting in some quick times. He has dropped rather further down the list now, down to 15th place. All he has got going, Pedro Diniz, with a bit of help from the German marshals. They've got him back onto the tarmac once again. Somebody else, that's Taki Inoue, going very slowly. And I think he may also have had a problem into the same corner. And it seems to be that one that's catching them out.
Isn't it ironic that the curve that all the problems are being caused at is actually named after the German host television broadcaster? But it is always slippery, and that RTL curve and the one that follows the bit curve, it's a funny corner. In the dry, you take a particular line, you try and take the same line in the rain, and you find the car just isn't responding. And in fact, the quickest way around those two corners is, I think, how we saw Michael Schumacher do so in wet conditions yesterday, and that's take a very, very wide, follow the actual outer line of the corner. There is grip there. You take the normal line in and you find you're not going to get round as you had hoped.
So most of the front runners are in the pits at the moment, although David Coulthard is on circuit currently. He's third fastest. Berger and Alesi fourth and fifth. Bouillon sixth. That's good performance from the Frenchman. Then Johnny Herbert, Heinz-Harald Frentzen, Rubens Barrichello and Olivier Panis. That's our top 10 at the moment. There is David Coulthard, pole sitter for the third Grand Prix in succession. Winner last time out and looking to repeat that victory here today. And in fact, in the championship, it's not mathematically impossible for him to win the title this year. Of course, it's very unlikely because he's some way behind Damon Hill. But in fact, in terms of mathematics, if he was to win every race and the other two didn't finish at all, which of course is somewhat unlikely, then it's still mathematically possible.
Well, and if he were to win the remaining 4 Grand Prix, that would give him a total of 5 Grand Prix victories, and that would make David Coulthard a very worthy world champion.
Yes, indeed, it would. And of course, McLaren taking them into their arms next year, as they've announced today. Coulthard and Hakkinen, a strong driver lineup, a young driver lineup, but a very strong one, with both very, very highly regarded talents in the world of Grand Prix racing.
Talents that can carry the team probably all the way up to the year 2000, but McLaren currently seeking the regain of form in their technology and trying to get this McLaren chassis to a point where it can be competitive at the very, very front. And it's been a very lean 2 years for McLaren, and whereas Williams and other teams, Benetton in particular and Ferrari, have made a better job of the regulations, out of the change in regulations. The last time McLaren were really at the very front was 1983, when they had that fantastic active ride, power brake, traction controlled, Ford engined chassis. 1993. Well, 83 was pretty good as well, but 1993, you are right. And that chassis was probably the most sophisticated ever seen, and in particular the last Grand Prix in 93, which Ayrton Senna won. I think the combination of the best driver in the world and the best chassis at that particular time saw one of the finest displays by a driver-team combination I've ever witnessed. And McLaren clearly, and they worked tirelessly to get back to that position, but so far they don't seem to be getting the numbers quite right.
Well, Marc Blundell, of course, driving for the team this year. We're just taking a little look at Olivier Panis. Now, did he go off or didn't he? No, he couldn't quite save that one across the grass, through the gravel. I think he should have been able to get that one back on reasonably safely, looking for the escape route and trying not to knock down one of those little plastic markers. They are soft plastic, so it doesn't do too much damage to the car. But John, a quick mention of Marc Blundell. He's done a good job for the team this year. Of course, he was drafted in later on. Nigel Mansell signed up with the team initially, couldn't fit the car, then did a couple of races, that all rather fell apart. And Marc Blundell's did a solid job for the team since then.
I would say he's fulfilled all the team expectations, and it is great disappointment, I'm sure, to Marc Blundell that after the work he has fulfilled for McLaren, there hasn't been a regular and permanent berth for him in another team. Now, there are still slots open, and one of them is at Sauber. Ligier, likewise, with the removal of Martin Brundle to Jordan for 1996, as we watch Heinz-Harald Frentzen have a little rotation. And that one, Harold, is not one of your best efforts because you got the car almost beached on the curb, but I think he'll manage to get it back off. But so Marc Blundell is looking not just at those teams in Formula One that are the teams that are just behind the top 4. He doesn't want to end up going down to the tail end of the grid. When you're driven for a top team in Formula One, the last thing you want to do is end up going all the way back to the tail. So as a consequence, he's looking at IndyCar racing in the States, and he has got a number of attractive offers, and it may be that he just says, look, sorry guys, if there's no place for me here in a top team, I'm just going to go and do something else.
Yes, indeed. Well, we'll have to wait and see what Marc Blundell's plans are currently. Marc is quite a long way down the list. He had the car stop on him earlier on in this session, so this will in fact be his first flying lap through the gloom. There goes Marc Blundell, and he sets the 18th fastest time on his first flying lap.
Well, Michael Schumacher comes out of the gloom, and that's going to be the name of this race this afternoon. Conditions I can't see improving dramatically And with such a low ambient temperature, the cloud base, although it has risen, we don't have the fog that we had at 9:30. The cloud base virtually just about 100 feet above the racetrack. But these conditions, very unlikely to see any significant improvement. So by the time this race starts at 2 o'clock, it's going to be real misery for all involved.
There you can see the times. Damon Hill still fastest in this session, ahead of Schumacher, then Coulthard third, Barrichello fourth, Frentzen, Berger and Alesi. And a little surprising perhaps after what we were saying about the performance of Ferrari, they're not living up to our expectations. They're 6th and 7th on the timesheet at the moment, but we've still got just about 7.5 minutes of this session to go, so maybe the two of them are waiting for the ideal opportunity with the track drying out a little bit. No rain actually falling at the moment, I think, just a little bit of fog still blowing around, and the track will be getting faster as we continue this session.
Well, the Ferrari's back on track. Gerhard Berger and Jean Alesi have both just returned to the track. If we watch Michael Schumacher sliding under braking, and again a good opportunity for Schumacher just to test track conditions in a competitive situation. Mark Blundell would not be trying to force the issue, of course, but still to go offline and feel the grip there with another car alongside you is another little bit of information gathering that the world champion will use to his advantage later in the day.
More traffic to deal with, and in fact it takes a very strange line there. Something went wrong.
Well, he just suddenly pulled off. Now whether there was a problem on board for Michael Schumacher or whether he decided just to do something to reassess what he wants for the coming lap. As we see, Jean Alesi gets his Ferrari over the curbs, and the sparks from the skid blocks that are used to retain the wooden plank. We still have these wooden planks underneath the car.
So whatever Schumacher was up to, don't quite know. There's one of the Williams sliding around and in trouble, coming on to start-finish straight.
It's Damon Hill, we believe, and just goes to show that even a Williams, which is currently the best chassis by a considerable amount in Formula One, is in trouble as well. And that's just simply, once the back end loses adhesion, the pendulum effect just carried that car around, and he was going too slow. He couldn't really use the power to balance the car. There wasn't enough momentum from the car to push it forward to balance the tail coming out. So what you saw was just the pendulum effect of the weight of the rear of the car swinging it around.
Locking up again into that left-hander there, Damon Hill. We've got just over 5 minutes. Let's take another closer look at what happened. We saw him sliding up at this one earlier on, gets it sideways. Look at the opposite lock-on. Not enough.
I just suspect that there's still quite a lot of water in that corner. You just get slightly off the line, and you end up with a car that isn't going to respond, and you're a passenger. You just sit there and wait for it to go again. A little bit too much from Damon, trying to get back into the session and over-eager and right in front of the pits, and that'll cause no doubt some hilarity amongst the team members when Damon gets back in.
Yes, most embarrassing place to do that, really, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. The team will remind him that you have to first get in a straight line in these conditions before you can get on the power, Damon. But no damage, and just probably a slight red face. Well, there are the Williams team members on the pit wall, and a pretty miserable place it is.
Hill fastest though still, by just 0.1 of a second now from Michael Schumacher, who sets some faster laps. Gerhard Berger has come up to third, then Coulthard fourth, Barrichello fifth, Frentzen sixth, and Alesi seventh. And there, another little off-track excursion, this time for Martin Brundle in the Ligier Mugen.
Well, it just makes you wonder why that one particular corner, the RTL curve, is trapping so many drivers this morning. There isn't any obvious water on the track. It just must be that the speed the drivers are approaching the corner, it may well be that they slightly misjudged the braking zone, because as Martin Brundle, who's on camera right now, did point out that there are no marker curves around the circuit. And I think expressed a point of view that said Formula One drivers shouldn't need those learner accessories. But that particular corner of the RTL curve, you're coming uphill, and then you sort of drop over the top of the crest, and then boom, and Alesi almost repeating we saw a lap ago. So it's a corner that it is possibly quite easy to overrun in terms of your approach speed, and that I think is what we're seeing happening to most people who've been in trouble there.
So Alesi down in 7th place at the moment. This could be an improvement on this lap, but look at that. Coulthard's gone fastest now from Damon Hill. Michael Schumacher half a second off Coulthard's pace. Then Gerhard Berger, Rubens Barrichello and Heinz-Harald Frentzen. So we're seeing some changes, and we'll see a few more before the end of this session as the track begins to dry out a little more. Let's see what Alesi manages on this lap. He's down in 7th place, and in fact that looks like it was the first lap out of the pits in this little section, so it will be this next lap that really gives us an idea of how well the Ferrari is going. Remember, he's qualified down in 6th place for this afternoon's Grand Prix.
Well, David Coulthard currently quickest. We see 1 minute 38.378, and that's just under half a second quicker than teammate and front row position Damon Hill. And now the rain beginning to fall again. You can see on the camera lenses that spotting is indicating rain. It doesn't necessarily have to fall all over the circuit, because as on both Friday and Saturday we saw rain falling at the lower point in the circuit, and it blows up and finally reaches where we are, which is directly above start-finish line.
Johnny Herbert just ahead. He's in 9th position. Coulthard, his last lap, almost exactly the same as his previous best. So he holds on to the fastest time in this session and has managed two virtually within a few hundredths of a second of each other. Then Schumacher, Berger, Barrichello. And still we're seeing the same names up at the top of the list. Frentzen is in 6th place, and once again in these wet conditions seems to be suiting both him and the Sauber Ford. So just over a minute and a half to go. Last chance for the teams to get their cars tuned up and for the drivers to really see what the conditions are like, and the prospects for a race of changeable conditions still very, very high indeed. There you can see the times, and there you can just see Jean-Christophe Bouillon moving out of the way.
Yes, that's the head-on shot into the RTL curve. That's the one that really has been the most troublesome this morning, and most drivers now have completed at least 10 laps in the case of Coulthard, but Damon Hill and Schumacher, they've got as many as 12. And Max Pappas, I think, has the record so far. He's found time to get 15 laps in, and really for someone like Max Pappas, who's really far down the grid, as we see Heinz-Harald Frentzen once again get off the track, but really the more laps in these conditions you can do, the better it's going to be. I mean, in many respects it's a driver will want to make changes to the car, but I think there's as much advantage as to stay out on the track and just go round and round and find that the track itself probably changes as much as the alterations that you might be seeking themselves would make.
Yes, indeed. Well, Frentzen seems to be having rather a few too many offs. Let's hope he gets them all out of his system this morning rather than in the race this afternoon. And there you can just see his trip across the gravel again, through and back out the other side. And he's done that a few times. I think they're going to find some gravel in some very strange places. Still has time to wave to the crowd, mind you, before retaking to the circuit. By the way, his teammate Jean-Christophe Bouillon, who is actually only one place behind him in this warm-up session, has qualified 13th. That is his best qualifying performance to date for the Sauber team. So perhaps Bouillon looking for a better result than he could do with a bit of a confidence booster after some tricky outings so far this year.
Well, Damon Hill in a gaggle of traffic, and of course the flag is out and session is officially over, but drivers used this last lap on their way back into the pits again just to pick up knowledge or information, and Damon looks down the inside of Olivier Panis to see whether there is an opportunity, whether there is grip or not. And Damon then cuts back into the pits, and there the flag for the last of the stragglers as they complete their 30 minutes warm-up in preparation for some 68 laps on the Nürburgring.
So Michael Schumacher looks like he's going to end up this session in 3rd, but it's the two Williams ahead of him once again, just as we saw in qualifying, with David Coulthard and Damon Hill setting the top 2 times. Behind Schumacher, Barrichello's put in a good performance to be 4th fastest, and then Gerhard Berger and Jean Alesi closely matched in the two Ferraris as ever, but not quite showing the sort of wet weather performance that we have seen on some previous occasions this year. Mika Häkkinen, Johnny Herbert rounding out the top 8. One or two cars just coming across the line to complete their lap, see if there's any improvement. There is one there for Gerhard Berger. He's just gone 2nd fastest.
Well, that was on the very last lap. in this 30-minute session. Gerhard Berger managed to find an improvement, and he split the two Williams Renaults, and finally a Ferrari has got itself up to the head of the times, and I thought maybe that would have happened earlier. We've seen such great performances from Gerhard Berger and Jean Alesi in conditions identical to what we have here at the Nürburgring, and well, for Jean Alesi, he's done 6th quickest. Gerhard Berger all the way up to 2nd, and that will help him, I'm sure, both within the Ferrari team, because it does seem that the relationship between Alesi and Berger took a further turn for the worse in Estoril. It resulted in a $200,000 fine for Jean Alesi for some words that he uttered to team manager Jean Todt, and the relationship not as healthy as it could have been or has been at different points in the year.
So there we are. Looks down the list. Berger putting in that last moment improvement. So he goes between Coulthard and Hill. Schumacher 4th. Then Barrichello and Alesi. Good performance from Mika Häkkinen. There's Johnny Herbert. And the two Saubers together this time. And for once, Jean-Christophe Bouillon almost matching Heinz-Harald Frentzen. Then Eddie Irvine down in 11th. Martin Brundle and Olivier Panis basically where they've been through every session so far this weekend. Marc Blundell down in 14th. Good performance from Pedro Lamy in his Minardi, ahead of Mika Sala, Luca Badoa, Max Papis, Andrea Montermini and Gabriele Tarquini. Tarquini standing in for Ukio Katayama and saying yesterday that driving these cars in the wet really was a bit of a shock to the system.
And in fact, Ukio Katayama is here this weekend. He turned up on Saturday in the Tyrrell pits, and he's looking forward to getting back into that Tyrrell Yamaha in the Pacific Grand Prix at TI Tanaka.
So the morning warm-up eventually comes to a close, and thank you for staying with us here on Eurosport for this rather wet and damp session. Hope you enjoyed it, and well, now you can go and do all those things that you've got to do on a Sunday morning, and then come back and join us at 1:30 for the build-up to the Grand Prix itself. Then we'll be live on the circuit with the grid lining up at just after 1:45, and we've really got an intriguing race in prospect with these sort of weather conditions. What is the weather going to do? As I speak, the fog is coming down a little bit more again, and it really is totally unpredictable.
Well, we've got Judo, World Championship Judo coming next, and